Hi everybody, my name is Jon Lehning, and today I want to talk about picking potential instruments for your students. Now, my experience is mostly as a private teacher, so I haven't ever had the opportunity to work with a student that has special needs, but I'd be very interested to hear your guys' opinions on what you think would or wouldn't work. Being primarily a woodwind player, I'm going to deal with the flute, clarinet, and saxophone, and the pros and cons of what you could be using for potential students. So I suppose it applies to physical issues as well as any cognitive and other things like that. So the first instrument I'm going to work with is the flute. One of the biggest pros is it's a relatively light instrument, and this is often why you see young girls in elementary band given the flute, just for the simple fact that it's easy for them to hold compared to like heavier instruments. One of the biggest things that I would keep in mind is if you have a student that has any kind of respiratory issues or trouble breathing, the flute might want to be an instrument you stay away from, because until a student has a more advanced embouchure, it takes a long time not only to develop a sound but to find a way to maintain the tone. Otherwise, because in the beginning often you hear students sound like where they're overblowing to try and get the instrument just to make any noise at all. So if you had a student who had breathing issues, it might be something you want to stay away from. Another issue with the flute, which you can see if I zoom in here, you have flutes that will have both closed and open holes. And all that means is if you had a student whose hands weren't big enough to cover the hole properly, when they finger a certain note, if there's a finger that's sneaking off and there's some space in there, rather than making a tone like this, it'll sound more like they won't be able to successfully create a tone. So it's just something to keep in mind for students with smaller hands. A last thing that I do is the flute in its natural position rests in between the two knuckles on your left hand index finger. So often I'll have students put some type of padding to just help alleviate that pressure so it doesn't wear on their hand. The next instrument I'd like to talk about is the clarinet. Similar to the flute, it also is made of only open holes, as you can see here. So again, if a student's hands can't properly cover the holes, then they're going to have trouble with the instrument. Something that I see often just with my own private students is that they're not physically developed enough to withstand holding the instrument for long periods of time. So when that happens, you'll often see them put the bell in between their knees, brace the instrument from underneath with their pinky fingers, or have some type of improper hand position that's very tight and tense. You want to try to avoid this, because the more they play, if they maintain that posture or they maintain that hand position, they could do long-term damage to their fingers, as well as it'll just make playing the instrument much more difficult. One of the best ways to do this is by using a neck strap or a claricord, which is one of the most common ones, and it can connect to the clarinet in a way that it helps hold the instrument up. And rather than having to worry about bracing the instrument yourself, you have your own built-in system to help hold up the instrument, making it much easier to execute playing on the instrument. So it's something I recommend to a lot of my students. Also, in the same way that I use the padding on the flute, I also use padding on the clarinet underneath the thumb rest. If you can see right there, I'll often have kids put something there to help. The last instruments that I want to talk about are the saxophone. And the saxophone is a great instrument for students to use. Although it is a little bigger, it again always uses a neck strap. And what that does is it helps brace the instruments for students who aren't strong enough to hold an instrument, but also it's only keys. There's no open hole mechanism, it's all just keys. So it doesn't really matter what size your hands are until you get into later playing where you need to use your pinky fingers. So saxophone is often an instrument I recommend to parents to have their children start working on from the beginning, because it's a relatively easy instrument to get into. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks.